Hi everyone, welcome to Brain Blitz Audios. Today, let's read a sci-fi story titled The Greatest Vision. Let's begin, shall we? Wherein the reader is introduced to the world. It was Alfonso Parazzi who constructed the first biosphere meant for residential habitation. The reporters and politicians watched as he cut the ribbon to one of the airlocks that separated the interior from the environment outside. It was Baffin Island, Canada. It was the dawning of a new age of humanity. It was the beginning of a new debate, which weighed the fate of stars and galaxies upon the scales of human wisdom. It begot the question, what is the greatest vision for the future of mankind? But Alfonso Parazzi could not have known that. To Parazzi, the bubble was his greatest vision, and today was the ultimate fulfillment of his life. Because today, the whole world marveled at and thanked him for all the years and tears he had given to it. Today was the first day he knew for certain that it had been worth it. Perhaps even the first day he knew for certain that it was good he had lived. Let's not dwell on how the biosphere worked. If you asked Alfonso, he could surely tell you. We're here simply to witness the beginning, the first cause, the giant leap for mankind that finally made the colonization of space not a possibility, but a plausibility. We can say that the biosphere did work. Canada was the first to buy stock in Alfonso Plastics when he created and demonstrated a cheap but relatively impervious lattice. First, it was used in cars and Tupperware and thousands of other little things that wanted flexible but tough material. The toughness was only a nice side effect, though. The most impressive aspect of the material was its inertness. It did not expand or contract under heat or cold, or react to any common element in the air or on the ground. It did not decompose. It did not conduct temperature. It was an absolute barrier of isness that could not be bullied into becomingness. The plastic, once made, could not be changed short of being melted down. But Alfonso didn't stop at Tupperware. He dumped all the money back into his research and kept pushing for the material that wouldn't just benefit the living, but life itself. This was the product. Inside the biosphere was a complete self-maintained environment. Water evaporated, condensed, and precipitated inside the bubble. Air was switched from carbon dioxide to oxygen by plants, and from oxygen to carbon dioxide by people. Crops were grown inside the bubble for the purposes of air recycling as well as self-reliance. A couple of roads and an airport outside the bubble connected it to the rest of Earth. The airlocks made it a chore entering and leaving, so people mainly stayed inside. That was the idea, a macrocosmic temperature regulator, a little bubble of comfort on the face of a desolate, barren, frozen wilderness, a blanket that kept in the heat Canada so greedily tore from the rest of their countrymen. Soon after, bubbles sprouted up in Russia, which had previously had the satisfaction of being the largest wasteland in the world. It spread into the Arctic and the Antarctic, though only the most hardy of pioneers thought it worthwhile to stray so far from the rest of the world. Methods were soon devised to keep it cool inside the bubble rather than warm, and Australia became a new frontier. Bubbles were made to keep things drier and specifically to completely purge the environment of unwanted diseases, insects, and unwanted parasites, to the transformation of Africa. Cities that had previously existed without bubbles argued over the cost of creating one and the benefits that could be expected. There were no longer tropical, temperate, and Arctic zones. The zone was now whatever the bubble wished it to be. The quality of life and cost of living skyrocketed and plummeted, and though there were still wars and rumors of wars, the multiplicity of little Edens that was sprouting up like a new species of vegetation spoke of a new innocence and beginning for mankind. Mankind's most mortal adversary, the mosquito, squished itself against the plastic barriers. Ants were told to dig elsewhere. Scorpions and cockroaches and flies were told to wait outside. Weeds almost always managed to sneak in somehow, but weevils, at least, were stopped. Locusts could no longer plague Egypt, even if they wanted to. Crop yields rose. The less bugs spoiled them. Reducing pesticides lowered the cost of food, improved the taste, and helped maintain the environment so it could then support a far larger population. The energy versus environment debate quietly dissipated as the primary need of fossil fuels such as heating and cooling had been banished. Most of Earth still lived outdoors, as the new term became, but mini bubbles, even amidst those cities, sheathed wooden houses from termites and Fido from the rain. Though Alfonso Parazzi had died long ago, the progression of his model was made by fresh, brilliant minds, hoping for their own epithet in the annals of mankind. The bubble defined the century. No other improvement even approached it. No other invention spawned so many blessings to people in so many ways, in so many places. But like all things, the change was slow and quiet and more gradual than the predictions. Many people, if asked whether their lives had changed or were much different from the lives of their parents or grandparents, would have answered no. There were still barbarous countries and poor countries. America still struggled to find a balance between satisfying the basic needs of the people and supporting the growth and freedom of the economy. There was never enough money to go around. Families still broke apart. Lovers still broke each other's hearts. Children still cried over every little thing. Men still drank too much and smoked too much and cursed too much and gambled too much. Lawsuits were still used as milk cows and weapons of spite in countries with civil courts. Politicians still flouted the system and changed their promises after the election. It was still scary for a woman to walk alone at night in Detroit. It still wasn't allowed for a woman to walk alone at night in Iran. The bubble, you see, didn't change all those little things about life. The bubble didn't remake life. It was the gift of more life and better life. There were even hopes of forming bubbles that could withstand the pressure of settlement under the ocean. Humanity still had to live inside it. The bubble was just plastic, ingeniously constructed plastic. Humanity still provided the stories, wherein the reader is introduced to Mars. Now, this terraforming of Earth could have continued quite some time, with more land brought into cultivation and comfort, and perhaps even the sea. However, long before the physical territory of the world had been filled with the prophetic planet-sheathing bubbles, the political territory had quite devoured it. There was scarcely a square foot of land some army wouldn't have rushed to protect their claim to. Mineral rights went right down to the mantle. Fishing rights and plankton farms were zealously guarded by watchdog satellites and Navy patrols. Airspace, radio space, even space was cut into the finest pie slices between the gun totters of the world. Why, there were claims by China and Japan over the next island the volcanoes were expected to raise above the water level. For many people living in the world, the countryside, though still empty, was far too occupied, and the opportunities, though ample, were claustrophobic to the rising generation, which saw no place left for themselves. And worst of all, people and cultures saw the last places in the world where a new flag could have been flown, gobbled up forever. Earth's frontiers were absolutely closed. If a new nation wanted to emerge, it had to carve itself from the old, which the old countries, for some reason, only allowed after years of bankruptcy and bloodshed, if ever. So that many who could have wished it never bothered to try. It was at this time that a research team had been funded at enormous expense to stay a year on the face of Mars, underneath man's best friend, a bubble. It was a temporary shelter with a reflectivity designed specifically to shield the scientists from the radiation, as well as customize the temperature on an otherwise freezing planet. It gave them 1 bar of atmosphere so they could breathe normally. The air and water had been imported. Trillions of dollars had gone to the project. Congress shook many a fist at pork barrel spending and waste, while grandmothers still couldn't afford treatments for cancer. But the project got off somehow or other. There seemed to be a ground swelling of popular support that no politician wished to balk. They had been to the moon so long ago, they refused to believe that with so much more technology and wealth, they still could not go to Mars. It was a point of world historical pride. They refused to be the generation that did nothing and got nowhere, lost between their parents and children. The researchers did not quite get used to the gravity. They had to relearn how to walk rather than jump, and toss rather than hurl. But it was noted that the less strain on the body, the better. The G could serve as a new relief for the elderly of frail frame, and the morbidly obese of far too unfrail a frame. Food still went down the researchers' throats. Blood still reached their toes. There was no reason why humanity could not adjust to a lighter load. Of their most important tasks, the scientists charted out the amount and locations of water on the planet. Though the bubble could recycle almost all the water that stayed inside it, it was far too expensive to lug Earth's oceans some millions of miles and dump them on Mars. They also charted out the locations of useful minerals such as iron, nickel, and zinc, trace resources necessary for the survival of humans. There were far fewer heavy metals on Mars than Earth, but in some places there were concentrations enough. The soil, obviously, was not suitable for plants, so air filters were used instead. But the researchers managed in manufacturing soil from organic soup and cultivating plants based upon it. Plants managed to grow virtually anywhere, to the consternation of bubble farmers who hoped never to see a weed again. But this same tenacity was reported with worldwide rejoicing when displayed in a small lot on a foreign planet. When the mission ended a year later, the plants having received enough light and the humans not having received too much, the new bubble was declared a success. It was left behind as a monument of Kilroy's having been ever here, but also, possibly, just maybe, as a staging ground for those who might have wished to follow. The expense was enormous. Nobody hoping to make their fortune had any intention of going to Mars. Good old Earth still unearthed a seemingly endless supply of resources for all that crawled over her. But there were groups of people pooling resources, 1,000,000 funding the trip of 1,000. Perhaps they held out the hope an improvement in space flight would allow them to follow. With a lifespan averaging 100 years in the civilized world, it was not uncommon to live through at least a few scientific watersheds. If not, at least they had the consolation that 1,000 did go. How many millions of people will give their lives and fortunes to see just one of their family, a cousin, a daughter, a nephew, a niece, be happy? How many millions have always given everything for some few blessed thousand to make their way in the world? Don't underestimate the goodness of people's hearts when it's said that millions of people seeded away their own hopes and dreams of ever reaching the red planet so that thousands could reach theirs. Humanity had not changed from being human with the invention of the bubble. Sometimes love means giving up your own job so that your spouse can pursue theirs. Sometimes love means bicycling the first leg of the race and letting the stronger cyclist draft you. Sometimes love means standing in the first rank of the trenches and waiting to be shelled so that the second line of trenches doesn't have to be. Love can demand terrible things from you, and yet people do it. All of those things. So how is it a wonder that love enabled millions of people to give up their hopes for the hopes of a few thousand others, when it has given so much more, so often before? The challenges of colonization were enormous, but so were the hearts of those first settlers. Mars could not support nearly as many people as Earth's billions. It was never meant to. Mars was seen as the haven for people, not in search of resources or space, but that oh so precious, ineffable word that so many have left home for before. Mars was colonized by bubbles of communities set forth with last tears and embraces by greater communities who left in search of freedom. There were as many people as there were bubbles, and each people landing safely on a land free of any claim by anyone with a gun, for the first time in their lives, took a deep breath and beheld for themselves for the first time that for this moment, for this one tiny space of time before a flag was flown, do as thou wilt was the whole of the law. That concludes this story titled The Greatest Vision, which was submitted as part of the 2003 Clarke-Bradbury International Science Fiction Competition. We hope you found this story interesting. For more of our wonderful stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, that is Brain Blitz Audios. If you want to get the latest stories, then please hit the notifications button that's present below the video. So, until the next story, take care, stay safe, bye-bye for now.